With the bracket bolted onto the car, we got both sides where we wanted it, and then I tacked it in place here on the back side underneath, on both sides, on the driver and passenger side. After I got them tacked, I dropped the whole subframe down and then lifted it back up, and it all lined up pretty much perfectly. That means I can start actually laying my bead all the way around here, top, bottom, and I should actually be good because these tacks should hold it exactly where it should be. So we'll go ahead, I'll leave it bolted in the car for as much of this as I possibly can. That way the weld shrinking doesn't cause me to have any major tolerance differences. And then once I go ahead and get this 99.9% in place, I'll go ahead and lower the subframe down and do the parts that I can't really reach in the car. Like this backside is kind of a pain if I could even get to it. So we'll take it out of the car for that. Went ahead and welded all the way around on the top and bottom of both sides. So now I can go ahead and actually put the rear end back inside of the car. And as long as both sides are right, then I can go ahead and actually start doing the brackets that go vertically. So let's test that out by throwing her back underneath there. Went ahead and bolted it back in. Everything still lines up perfectly, which is amazing. So now it's time for me to make this vertical bracket and then weld that in place. So we'll figure out exactly how I'm gonna make this template and go from there. For the brackets that go vertically, I wanted a slight bend inside of the metal. So I went ahead and I drove up it with my truck and did some pretty redneck fabrication. But now I have a very slight bend to it at the top, or what I will make the top of both brackets. So we'll go ahead and cut these out as they need to be, and then that will help me guide it. So the one on the driver's side is going to go to the left, and the one on the passenger side is going to go to the right. That way, when I get the car's rear end in, it kind of guides themselves into place. All right, got this bracket cut out for both sides. Obviously, I'm on the passenger side. Not that you guys care. But next step is gonna be probably getting my holes through it. That way I can bolt this in place and then tack weld it to here. Take the whole thing down. I'll make my cut where I want it here to line up with this kind of neatly. Take the whole thing down, maybe. Put my gussets in place, weld the gussets, that way those are lined up right. And they can hold this from moving too much with the weld shrinking. I don't want it to move too much. So I think that's the next step. Now that I have those two holes made out, I'm gonna go ahead and tack weld this in place. The reason why is I wanna make sure that this doesn't change on its axis as I weld it. I wanna make sure that it's not moving with the weld shrink. So I'm gonna weld the gussets in place mainly first, but in order to make sure that this doesn't move too much, I'll go ahead and I'll do some welds mainly under the bolts. I have this piece is bolted into the car, and so is this piece. So they shouldn't move with the weld shrink because of that. So we'll lay a few tacks down and then we'll get to making the gussets. All right, I got those two tack welds in place. I went ahead and I lowered this and raised it back up to make sure that I was still able to get this thing in and out. That is a concern because this angle here between the horizontal and the vertical plates is not 90 degrees, so it doesn't actually sit perfectly like that. You have to make sure that you aren't letting the plate go towards the center of the car too much. Otherwise, you'll have issues with getting this thing in and out. So I'm good. It rubs a little bit on its way up, but that just means it's nice and snug. What we'll go ahead and make sure to do is put these gussets in place. We're gonna put these bolts back in before the gussets start being put in, and we're going to do one about here and one at the front of it. So let's go ahead and get this thing bolted back in, and then we'll work on those gussets. Now that I got this piece cut, you can see that it's not actually 90 degrees. I have a 90-degree angle on the back of this triangle, so I'm going to have to cut the front of it, in this case, at an angle in order to get this thing to actually sit down flat. I've just been kind of eyeballing it exactly where I want to and getting it super close. I know that there's a better way to do it if you care if it's absolutely perfect, but once it's welded in place, it's not going to go anywhere as long as you do a good job. So I'm not too worried about it. So I went ahead and got these brackets both completely welded up. And I just am not happy with how this finished. I'm not happy with the way that I welded it. Part of it is because I just didn't do a very good job, and the other half of it is my welder was not very good. So, solution. So we have a new welder here. So now that I have the new welder, I'm gonna grind off all the old weld that I'm really not happy with and re-weld it as I see fit with this new, better welder. So it's gonna be fun with the carbide bit, but I mess up sometimes and I have to have some high expectations for myself. I got this welded to my satisfaction now. I think this looks much better and it should be stronger with the new welder. Next step is I have to cut this line, make some sort of a curve here and then cut down here. Reason why is the tire wants to rub right about here because I added this extra thickness, this extra material. So we're gonna go ahead and figure out exactly what I gotta do for it to make it how I want. But this is just like a rough idea of what we're doing next. So I have a rough cut around here now in order for me to actually let the wheel get fully attached. The next thing that we gotta do is try and lower the car. I already made sure that the tire clears it, you know, in the air and everything, but I wanna get the whole thing back together. But in order to do that, I need springs in place. Theoretically, I could put the factory springs, but I think with the way that I've been doing everything, it's not gonna actually let the stock springs really sit in place that easily, or the cut springs that I have for that matter, which were already a pain to get in place. So I think the correct move for me is to actually install the coilovers. We've got the car on the ground, and I'm just doing some test fitting with the coilovers in. If I can get this to focus, you can see, I know it's not super focused, but you can see that the coilover spring and my mount are super close. I went ahead and I cut it a lot here to make clearance, but it seems like I'm gonna have to make it pretty much flush right here on this side in order for me to have some good clearance. So we'll go ahead and finish that up. I did do some clearancing, so now it does clear, but I wanna make sure that it's never gonna bind on this or never gonna touch this. So we can do that once it's actually out of the car. But I just wanted to show you guys this. This is a side effect of raising up the rear end. It makes it closer. I would imagine if I didn't do this, these coilovers would actually fit perfectly fine. I don't have a way of telling myself because I went straight to the hardtail mount before these springs were ever in, but it is just something to keep in mind. I did nick the spring, not a big deal to me because, you know, not gonna ever see it, but just something to keep in mind. Off camera, we did some more, you know, cutting on this, made some room around for the tire to actually fit. And on this side over here, we made some more room for the spring to go by. So now I have these 100% where I want with clearance. We're gonna go ahead and take this whole rear end back out of the car and we'll make it look a little bit better because I was just, you know, cutting it very rough up in the car. But everything clears how we want it to, and we're golden. One other thing I also did was mark where the sway bar is touching here, because right now it currently rests against the trunk of the car, and I'm gonna have to cut that out or massage it, probably end up cutting it, because I think all of this is gonna come out of the car for our fuel cell, so we'll see. Insert stupid photo here, or video. Insert image, whatever.